Jennifer Fichter. Jennifer Fichter was everything a parent could want in a teacher: bright, passionate, and deeply involved in her students' lives. With a degree from the University of Florida and a polished teaching career across Central Florida, she'd earned a reputation as a rising star in education. By her late 20s, she held a coveted position at the prestigious Central Florida Aerospace Academy, a school known for shaping future engineers and pilots. But behind her warm smile and glowing performance reviews was a secret that would send shockwaves through an entire community. In April 2014, Jennifer Fichter's career began to unravel after a parent discovered concerning messages on her 17-year-old son's phone. That discovery led to a formal investigation, one that would become one of Florida's most widely reported educator misconduct cases. Authorities found that Fichter had engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a student, which allegedly involved multiple private meetings over several months. As the case developed, additional students came forward with similar accounts. In total, 3 17-year-old male students were identified, all of whom had been in her classes. Prosecutors stated the misconduct was ongoing and serious in nature. Fichter was eventually arrested and charged with multiple counts related to unlawful behavior involving students under her supervision. She was arrested in April 2014 and held on a high bond. As investigators uncovered more information, additional charges were brought forward. In Polk County alone, Fichter was charged with 37 felony counts related to misconduct involving students under her care, a serious offense under Florida law due to her position of trust. In March 2015, she pleaded guilty to all charges. During sentencing, the judge acknowledged her remorse but emphasized the repeated nature of the offenses. On July 2, 2015, she was sentenced to 22 years in prison. The length of the sentence drew national attention, particularly given that such cases involving female educators often result in lighter penalties. Prosecutors, however, argued that the sentence was appropriate given the extent of the misconduct and her role as a teacher. Fichter also faced charges in neighboring Hillsborough and Orange counties, where she received additional concurrent prison time. The 22-year sentence from Polk County remains the most significant. She is currently serving her sentence at Gadsden Correctional Facility in Quincy, Florida. According to official records, her earliest possible release date is January 2035. Upon release, she will be subject to lifelong restrictions and public monitoring as required by law. The case sparked widespread scrutiny within the school system. The Lakeland District had to confront how such actions went unnoticed for so long, raising questions about internal oversight, reporting protocols, and digital communication between teachers and students. On a larger scale, the case reignited national debates about how gender may influence legal outcomes. Many pointed out that similar cases involving male teachers often lead to harsher consequences. In this instance, the court made clear that professional boundaries, regardless of gender, must be upheld without exception. Jennifer Fichter's case remains one of the most widely discussed examples of educator misconduct in recent history. And while she expressed regret at her sentencing, the impact on students, families, and the school community continues to resonate. This case serves as a clear reminder that those in trusted positions must be held accountable. While media attention may fade, the consequences, legal and personal, continue behind the scenes. Pamela Joan Rogers. Pamela Joan Rogers wasn't just another teacher in McMinnville, Tennessee. She was a hometown success story. Born in 1977, she'd grown up there, excelled in school sports, and later came back to give back, earning a degree in physical education and landing a job at Centertown Elementary. She coached, taught, and was known for her energy and warmth in the classroom. To parents and colleagues, she seemed like someone who truly cared, someone who had it all figured out. But beneath that picture-perfect image was a series of decisions that would not only destroy her career but shock the entire town and capture headlines across the country. In late 2004, Rogers, then 27 years old, developed an inappropriate relationship with a 13-year-old male student. Over the course of several months, the two exchanged messages and met privately outside of school hours. These encounters were later described by investigators as involving unlawful contact, and they ultimately violated both ethical standards and state law. The relationship was hidden from school staff and parents until early 2005 when suspicions began to surface. In February of that year, school officials contacted law enforcement after learning about the situation. A full investigation began. Evidence included digital communications, interviews, and statements from those involved. Rogers was arrested shortly after and charged with multiple counts related to inappropriate behavior with a minor in her care. The case drew national headlines because of her role as an educator and the young age of the student involved. Rogers initially denied the allegations but later agreed to a plea deal. In August 2005, she was convicted of several charges related to her conduct and received an 8-year suspended sentence. She served approximately 6 months in jail and was released on probation for over 7 years. As part of her sentence, she was permanently banned from teaching and was required to register with authorities due to the nature of the offense. For a short time, it seemed she would move on under the terms of her probation. But in April 2006, she was arrested again. This time, she had violated the conditions of her release by contacting the same minor and sending inappropriate messages and content through a third-party phone. The new violation led to a second round of legal action. In July 2006, a judge revoked her probation and sentenced her to 7 years in state prison for the breach of court orders. That wasn't the end of it. In 2007, her sentence was extended by another 2 years after it was discovered she had attempted to continue contact through disguised identities. Authorities emphasized that her repeated disregard for legal restrictions made her case more serious. Her behavior had moved from an initial violation of trust to ongoing criminal conduct. After serving her time, Rogers was released from prison in 2012. For a few years, she remained out of the public eye, but in 2015, she faced yet another legal case. This time involving contraband in a correctional setting. She was charged with attempting to smuggle prohibited items, including hidden phones, into a Tennessee prison facility. She was convicted and sentenced to an additional 8 years in prison for her role in the scheme. As of the most recent available records, Pamela Rogers remains incarcerated. Her case has become one of the most widely discussed examples of repeated boundary violations by a former teacher. It's often referenced in conversations about how institutions respond to educator misconduct, especially when trust between adults and minors is broken. The town of McMinnville was deeply affected by the case. Parents, teachers, and administrators were left with questions about oversight and early warning signs. Since then, school policies across the region have been updated to include stricter training and clearer reporting protocols. Rogers's story also drew national attention to the broader conversation about how the legal system handles cases involving female authority figures and misconduct. In the end, this case highlights the long-term consequences of abusing a position of trust. What started as one individual crossing professional boundaries evolved into years of repeated legal issues and institutional reform. The damage left behind affected families, students, and the credibility of an entire school system. While the legal chapters of this story may eventually close, the lessons continue to inform how schools and communities work to protect those most vulnerable. Brittany Zamora. Brittany Zamora was, on the surface, a well-liked and promising teacher. Born in 1991, she earned her degree in elementary education and went on to teach 6th grade at Los Brises Academy in Goodyear, Arizona. She was known for being active in the classroom, and students seemed to enjoy her lessons. To colleagues, she came across as motivated and committed to her role. But in 2018, everything changed. A series of decisions would take her from being a trusted educator to the center of a criminal investigation, one that shocked a community and made headlines across the country. In early 2018, Zamora began developing an inappropriate relationship with one of her students, a 13-year-old boy. The two started exchanging personal messages through online platforms and cell phones. What initially appeared to be friendly communication escalated into contact that was not only unethical but unlawful. The situation became more concerning when it was revealed that these interactions had extended to physical meetings during and after school hours. These incidents reportedly took place in her classroom and vehicle, often during times when supervision was limited. The relationship came to light thanks to a parent who had installed a phone monitoring app on their child's device. When troubling messages were discovered, the parent immediately alerted authorities. Law enforcement responded quickly, launching a full investigation. Evidence was collected from text conversations, social media accounts, and digital records, all of which supported the allegations. Interviews with those involved confirmed the nature of the relationship and the extent of the misconduct. In March 2018, Brittany Zamora was arrested. She was charged with multiple counts of unlawful behavior involving a student under her supervision, attempted inappropriate contact, and public indecency stemming from incidents that reportedly occurred in the presence of another student. The prosecution emphasized that these were not isolated moments but part of a pattern of serious violations by someone entrusted with the care and development of young students. Facing overwhelming evidence, Zamora agreed to a plea deal in May 2019. By accepting responsibility, she avoided a lengthy trial that would have exposed additional details. On July 12, 2019, she was sentenced to 20 years in an Arizona state prison with lifetime probation to follow. Under the terms of her conviction, she is not eligible for early release, and she is subject to permanent legal monitoring following her conviction. The plea deal also spared her from potentially facing even longer incarceration had the case gone to trial. Zamora is currently serving her sentence at the Arizona State Prison Complex, Perryville. During her time in custody, reports indicate that she has taken on roles aimed at rehabilitation, including work assignments within the facility. In 2020, she filed for divorce from her husband, who had initially stood by her during the early phase of her arrest. Public records also show she has participated in counseling and offender programs as part of her institutional requirements. The impact of the case on the Las Brisas school community was immediate. The school district implemented new safeguards, including clearer boundaries for digital communication between staff and students, updated training protocols, and mandatory reporting procedures. Parents, educators, and administrators expressed shock and concern over how the relationship had developed undetected for so long. The story sparked wider conversation across the U.S. about misconduct in education and how gender perceptions can sometimes shape public and legal responses. Zamora's case also led to a civil lawsuit filed by the victim's family, who sought accountability beyond the criminal sentence. The family declined private settlement offers and instead brought the matter into the public eye, which helped raise awareness and prompted deeper policy reviews at the school and district level. Ultimately, the story of Brittany Zamora serves as a stark reminder of how important it is to maintain professional boundaries in educational environments. It highlights the vulnerability of young students and the absolute responsibility that teachers carry, not just to educate but to safeguard. The consequences of this case continue to influence training programs, hiring practices, and digital communication policies in schools across the country. Even after her release, Zamora will remain under court supervision and public scrutiny for the rest of her life. For the victim, the family, and the school community, the aftermath of this betrayal still lingers. What began as a breach of trust became a lesson in oversight, accountability, and the enduring impact of misconduct within a role meant to protect and empower. Joynes. Rebecca Joynes was once viewed as a capable and enthusiastic secondary school teacher. Born in December 1993, she studied sports science and earned her teaching qualifications before working in supply roles across Greater Manchester. By her late 20s, she had taught in several schools and was known for her friendly, approachable nature, especially in subjects like math and physical education. But in 2021, a series of choices would end her career, break the trust of those around her, and place her at the center of one of the UK's most disturbing teacher misconduct cases in recent years. The case began when Joynes, then 28 years old, started to cross professional boundaries with a 15-year-old pupil, referred to during the court case as Boy A. At the time, she was working as a supply teacher at his school. According to evidence presented later in court, she began by flirting in class and then used a suggestive method to initiate personal communication. She gave the student part of her phone number and asked him to figure out the missing digits. The student texted her, and their contact quickly escalated. Messages became frequent and personal, and soon he was visiting her flat after school hours. Investigators later revealed that their relationship involved gifts, including a designer belt worth over £300 and secret meetings. During their time together, Joynes created a scenario that blurred the lines between educator and peer. She referred to him as her boyfriend, and the student later testified to feeling both manipulated and confused. According to court documents, the misconduct occurred on multiple occasions, all while she was in a position of trust and responsibility. In October 2021, before that investigation had concluded, Joynes was released on bail with strict conditions prohibiting any contact with minors. But instead of adhering to those restrictions, she initiated contact with another pupil, Boy B, who was also 15 at the time. This second relationship developed through direct messaging apps and eventually led to in-person meetings. It was later revealed that Joynes invited the boy to her home, where they had what she described as date nights, complete with candles and rose petals. During this time, she became pregnant. A later paternity test confirmed the student was the biological father. That child was placed into care shortly after birth. When the second relationship was uncovered, it deepened the legal and public consequences of the original case. Parents, school staff, and child protection agencies were alarmed not only by the repeated misconduct but also by the clear disregard for bail conditions. Law enforcement and prosecutors emphasized how both cases involved a breach of trust and the exploitation of vulnerable students. Joynes was formally arrested and charged with multiple offenses. She faced 6 counts of unlawful contact with a child, including 2 counts of engaging in that behavior while in a position of trust. During the trial, she pleaded guilty to all charges. The court acknowledged her cooperation but also highlighted the serious and repeated nature of the misconduct. On July 4, 2024, Judge Tina Landale sentenced Joynes to 6.5 years in prison. She is now subject to lifetime legal monitoring and public protection restrictions. A restraining order was issued preventing any further contact with either student. Joynes is currently serving her sentence in a UK women's prison. Under British sentencing guidelines, she is expected to serve at least half her term in custody before being released on license. Her teaching license has been permanently revoked, and she is barred from working with children or vulnerable adults in the future. The case sparked outrage across Greater Manchester and raised serious questions about how misconduct could happen twice, especially while Joynes was under legal supervision. Schools faced pressure to review how supply staff are monitored and how early warning signs are addressed. It also drew attention to cases where the victims are teenage boys and the offender is a female teacher, situations often underreported or not taken as seriously. In this case, the court responded firmly. Both victims spoke of confusion, betrayal, and lasting impact. Joynes used messaging apps to build secret relationships, highlighting the need for better digital oversight. Many schools have since updated policies and training. Advocacy groups praised the sentence as a step toward equal accountability. Joynes's repeated violations showed how urgent it is to act when red flags appear. Her case remains a stark reminder of how trust, once broken, can cause damage far beyond the classroom. Carol and White. Carol and White was once a trusted figure in her local community in Scotland. A qualified primary school teacher, she had worked with young children for several years and was viewed by many as kind, approachable, and professional. Her role gave her direct access to some of the most impressionable students, children in their early formative years who looked up to her not just as an educator, but as someone they could trust. But in 2022, that image came crashing down. Behind the scenes, White had been engaging in conduct that would later be described by authorities as a serious abuse of trust. The case unfolded after 2 boys, aged 11 and 12, spoke up about messages and interactions that made them feel uncomfortable. What started as casual conversation escalated into private exchanges that quickly crossed professional boundaries. It was later revealed in court that White had sent a series of inappropriate messages to both students using digital communication platforms to initiate and maintain contact. The content of these messages raised immediate red flags. According to prosecutors, they were not only unprofessional, but included language that suggested personal interest and blurred the lines between teacher and student. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that this was not limited to digital messages. Authorities uncovered evidence suggesting that inappropriate physical contact had also occurred. The exact nature of those interactions was not fully disclosed in open court, but the prosecution emphasized that the behavior had caused emotional distress to both boys. It was made clear that the incidents took place while White was in a position of authority and responsibility. Police Scotland conducted a thorough investigation, which included reviewing phone records, interviewing witnesses, and working closely with child protection officers. The evidence presented was strong enough to bring formal charges against White. She was arrested and later brought before the courts to face multiple counts related to misconduct involving minors. Throughout the legal proceedings, White initially denied the allegations. Her defense argued that her intentions had been misunderstood and that there was no intent to harm. However, the court found otherwise. Testimony from the victims combined with the digital evidence and professional assessments led to a unanimous conclusion. Her actions had breached the duty of care expected from someone in her role. On June 14, 2022, the court sentenced Carol and White to 3 years in prison. She was also placed on the sex offenders register, meaning she will be subject to long-term legal monitoring and will face strict conditions even after her release. The judge presiding over the case stated clearly that White had not only violated professional boundaries, but had caused significant psychological harm to children who were meant to be under her care. Following the sentencing, there was widespread reaction across the Scottish education sector. Local authorities began re-evaluating their oversight of primary school staff, especially those working closely with vulnerable age groups. Education Scotland issued statements reinforcing the importance of safeguarding protocols and the duty of all educators to maintain clear professional boundaries at all times. The case also prompted discussions about digital communication policies between staff and students, particularly in environments where teachers are trusted with unsupervised access to children. Parents were understandably shaken by the case, and many called for better screening and more transparency when it comes to hiring both full-time and substitute teachers. Some school districts responded by reviewing staff training, aiming to better identify warning signs and reinforce boundaries in professional settings. For the families involved, the damage went far beyond headlines. The two boys received counseling and continued support from local child services. In court, their statements reflected deep feelings of confusion and betrayal, feelings that experts say are all too common when a trusted adult crosses the line. Child protection advocates welcomed the outcome. They saw the sentence as an important step toward holding authority figures accountable regardless of gender. In the past, cases involving female teachers and male students haven't always been treated with the same seriousness. But this time, the justice system sent a clear message: abuse of power won't be ignored. Carol and White's case now stands as a warning of how quickly trust can be broken and how lasting the consequences can be. Her prison term will eventually end, but the impact on those affected will likely last much longer. For the wider community, it was a reminder that protecting children isn't just about rules, it's about responsibility. And when someone in a trusted role violates that, the fallout reaches far and deep. Alice McBrearty. Alice McBrearty was once a secondary school teacher in East London. Known by colleagues and students for her professionalism and energy in the classroom, she had completed her teacher training and was working in a respected school where she taught core academic subjects to teenagers preparing for their exams. On the surface, she was a trusted educator with a steady career path. But in 2017, her reputation and freedom were stripped away after a criminal investigation revealed a serious abuse of her position. The case began quietly when concerns were raised about McBrearty's conduct with one of her male students, a boy who was just 15 years old at the time. According to court documents, the relationship between teacher and student started as casual interaction within the classroom, but quickly crossed professional boundaries. What was initially dismissed by some as friendly or overly familiar behavior escalated into something far more serious. Over time, McBrearty used text messaging and social media platforms to maintain private communication with the student. Their exchanges grew increasingly personal and were conducted without the knowledge of parents or school officials. According to investigators, these private conversations led to several unsupervised meetings outside of school grounds. As the investigation later confirmed, the relationship involved encounters in various locations, including a hotel and a private vehicle. In one instance, inappropriate contact allegedly took place in a classroom setting after hours. Authorities stressed that all of these actions occurred while McBrearty was in a clear position of authority and responsibility over a student who was legally unable to provide valid consent under UK law. The situation came to light when the school was alerted by another student who had become aware of the behavior and reported it to a staff member. That disclosure triggered a full safeguarding response, and police were brought in to investigate. Officers from the Metropolitan Police examined digital messages, interviewed the student, and collected evidence from various sources. The findings were serious enough to lead to McBrearty's arrest and formal charges. Throughout the legal proceedings, prosecutors emphasized that McBrearty had knowingly taken advantage of her role as a teacher. They noted that she had arranged private meetings, concealed the relationship from colleagues, and maintained contact despite knowing it was wrong. The court also heard that she had described the student as special and went to great lengths to keep the relationship hidden even after suspicions began to rise. On October 6, 2017, Alice McBrearty was sentenced to 16 months in prison for engaging in inappropriate conduct with a student under her care. The judge noted that while she had expressed regret, her actions represented a serious breach of trust and had caused emotional harm to a vulnerable teenager. In addition to the prison sentence, McBrearty was placed on the sex offenders register, meaning she is subject to long-term legal restrictions and public protection requirements. Following the conviction, her teaching license was revoked, and she was barred from working with children or vulnerable individuals in the future. Education authorities across East London reviewed their internal protocols to ensure that warning signs such as frequent one-on-one conversations or personal messaging would be more closely monitored. The case also sparked wider debate in the UK about how misconduct by female teachers is perceived compared to male offenders. Commentators noted that these cases are often downplayed even though the impact on victims is just as serious. In this instance, the court sent a clear message: abuse of power is unacceptable regardless of gender. Parents and advocacy groups called for better staff training and stronger reporting systems. They also emphasized the importance of listening to students, especially when their concerns seem unclear or hesitant. This case only came to light because one student had the courage to speak up, highlighting how vital it is to empower young people to report inappropriate behavior. For the victim, the emotional toll was significant. Though his identity was protected, court records described feelings of confusion and betrayal. He and his family were offered support throughout the legal process, and the court recognized his bravery in coming forward. As for McBrearty, her actions ended her career and left lasting legal and personal consequences. She remains subject to long-term restrictions and public protection measures. This case stands as a reminder of the responsibility teachers hold. Education isn't just about academics, it's about trust. When that trust is broken, the damage can last a lifetime. The legal response here was clear. And for schools across the UK, it reinforced the need for stronger safeguards and real accountability. Gaie Delap. Gaie Delap enters this story as a retired schoolteacher from Bristol, United Kingdom. In her mid-70s, she spent decades in classrooms guiding young minds and nurturing curiosity. A Quaker by faith, she lived with a quiet conviction in peaceful, principled living. Her calm and composed exterior seemed at odds with the intensity of the world's climate emergency. But an unwavering sense of moral duty would change that balance. By November 2022, Delap joined a wave of non-violent direct action by Just Stop Oil, participating in a blockade of the M25 motorway, London's orbital highway encircling the capital. On one of the gantries above the motorway, Delap, now 75, climbed into position with a group of activists who halted traffic for around an hour. This wasn't a stunt for attention. It was a protest aimed directly at a government still permitting new fossil fuel licenses. Her presence was emblematic, a retired teacher calmly perched atop a motorway, risking arrest to raise alarm about the planet's future. But Britain's legal response was severe. In summer 2024, Delap and her co-protesters were convicted of causing a public nuisance under the UK's Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Act 2022. At Basildon Crown Court, Judge Shane Collery handed down a 20-month prison sentence. He acknowledged their conscience but described their actions as disproportionate given the widespread disruption. In 2023, Delap was first sent to prison and later released under a home detention curfew. But a technical snag stemming from a medical condition that prevented her from wearing an ankle tag and the unavailability of a suitable wrist tag led to her recall in December 2024. She spent Christmas behind bars simply because the tagging system failed her. Her supporters mobilized quickly. MPs, Quaker groups, and legal rights organizations all protested what they called an unnecessary and disproportionate recall. In January 2025, Delap became part of a rare collective appeal, the Lord Walney 16, where the Court of Appeal reviewed sentences for 16 Just Stop Oil activists together. In March, the court acknowledged the original prison terms failed to properly account for their rights to protest. Delap's sentence was reduced from 20 to 18 months, but was still seen by many as excessive for a peaceful protest by a vulnerable elderly woman. Even as she pursued further appeal to the UK Supreme Court and lodged legal challenges under the European Convention on Human Rights, her case captured public attention. It triggered questions about disproportionate punishment, state surveillance, systemic failures, and fairness, both in punishment and in implementation. Her supporters included Quaker groups, Green Party MPs, legal advocacy organizations, and mental health charities, all rallying around the view that justice had not been served. Many argued that Delap's tagging recall in particular reflected punitive bureaucracy, double jeopardy for what had already been deemed nonviolent protest. Even the prison minister faced pressure to fix the system. Yet the courtroom's ruling reflected a wider backdrop, the UK government's tightening legal grip on climate activists through new legislation like the 2022 Act and high-profile prosecutions. Official strategy had shifted toward deterrence over dialogue. Now in 2025, Gaie Delap, retired, respectful, principled, stands at the center of a complex story. Her age, her peaceful stance, and yet her conviction for public nuisance challenge ordinary perceptions of protest and punishment. Did a grandmother figure deserve prison time at all? And if peaceful resistance is criminalized, what does that suggest about the boundaries of civic dissent? Her 18-month sentence reduction and continued appeals didn't erase her initial conviction, but they did spark debate about proportionality, elderly activists, and how the law balances disruption against public interest. Today, her case remains unresolved. Delap's Supreme Court bid and human rights litigation are ongoing, but her impact is clear. The case has stirred legal scrutiny and amplified conversations about how societies should respond to moral protest, especially when the protesters are not young radicals but retired educators driven by conscience. Gaie Delap's journey offers a compelling reflection on the tension between state authority and civil disobedience. It asks whether legal lines can define moral conviction, and it reminds us how one person's peaceful stand can illuminate the difficult choices societies face in times of crisis. Kellie Anne-Marie Whiteside. Kellie Anne-Marie Whiteside once worked as a science teacher in southeast Queensland, Australia. Born in 1980, she was a married mother of 3 and taught at several schools across the region. To colleagues and students, she appeared professional and dedicated. Parents trusted her, and she was known as someone who could relate to students with ease. But in 2025, that image was permanently dismantled after a long-running investigation exposed serious breaches of professional boundaries with one of her former pupils. The situation began nearly a decade earlier in 2015. Whiteside first connected with the student, a 12-year-old girl, through her teaching role. Initially offering support and mentorship, she gradually developed a relationship that went far beyond the accepted norms of teacher-student interaction. She stayed in contact with the student for years using social media, messaging apps, and face-to-face meetings, even long after the student had left school. At the time, few suspected anything was wrong, but behind the scenes, she was using her influence to build and maintain control over the young person. Whiteside used her position to create emotional dependency. She communicated regularly outside of class, offering guidance while also encouraging secrecy. As the student grew older, the contact didn't end, it intensified. By the time the student reached adulthood, the relationship had been ongoing for nearly 8 years. Throughout this time, the former teacher had reinforced her authority through subtle manipulation, maintaining an inappropriate dynamic that should never have been allowed to continue. In 2023, the student came forward and disclosed the full extent of what had happened. Law enforcement and child protection authorities were notified, and a thorough investigation followed. Detectives reviewed messages, interviews, and digital records spanning several years. The evidence showed that Whiteside had ignored clear professional boundaries over a long period, leading to her arrest and formal charges. Whiteside was removed from her teaching position and appeared in the Brisbane District Court in March 2025. She pleaded guilty to serious charges relating to unlawful conduct with a minor while in a position of trust. Although the case had originally involved multiple accusations, prosecutors proceeded with one representative charge to spare the victim further legal exposure. During sentencing, the judge described Whiteside's actions as a significant breach of trust, noting the lasting emotional effects on the student who had relied on her during a vulnerable stage in life. The court sentenced Kellie Anne-Marie Whiteside to 5 years in prison. She will be eligible for parole in March 2027 after serving at least half her sentence. She has also been permanently barred from teaching and working with minors, placed on Australia's offender registry, and will remain under supervision following her release. The student involved in the case has since received ongoing support and counseling to help rebuild after what the court acknowledged was a long period of influence and manipulation. The case had a major impact on the Queensland school system and prompted wider public discussion across Australia. In response, the Department of Education introduced updated training for all teachers on professional boundaries, student safeguarding, and early detection of inappropriate conduct. Additional support programs were also introduced for students, encouraging them to report any interactions that make them feel uncomfortable or pressured. Beyond school walls, the case drew attention to how misconduct by female educators is sometimes underreported or misunderstood. Experts emphasize that abuse of authority can occur regardless of gender and that every student deserves the same protection and care. In this instance, the legal system treated the case with the seriousness it deserved, and the community was left to reflect on how to strengthen systems to prevent similar situations in the future. Today, Kellie Anne-Marie Whiteside remains in custody, serving her sentence. Her teaching license has been revoked, and she will not be allowed to return to any role involving contact with children. While the legal proceedings may be over, the effects of the case are still being felt in the classroom, in training rooms, and in the lives of those it impacted. This case serves as a clear reminder of the responsibility that comes with working in education. Students depend on teachers not just for academic guidance, but for support, structure, and safety. When that trust is broken, the consequences go far beyond the individual. It shakes the confidence of families, colleagues, and entire communities. And in this instance, it also served as the catalyst for meaningful reforms in school oversight and teacher accountability. Malka Leifer. Malka Leifer spent years building a respected professional identity, first as a teacher, then as principal of the Adass Israel School, a private religious girls' school in Melbourne, Australia. Born in 1966 in Israel, she later moved to Australia and led a school community that valued trust, tradition, and moral guidance. Administrators and families relied on her vision for their children's education. Yet behind this trusted public persona lay a pattern of behavior that would eventually plunge her into legal scrutiny, international controversy, and serious criminal consequences. Between 2004 and 2007, two sisters, students at her school, experienced what was later deemed a persistent abuse of power. Leifer used her position as a mentor to manipulate their trust. What began as academic support and emotional encouragement quickly shifted into exploitative behavior. These actions occurred at school camps, within school grounds, in staff offices, and even at her home. This repeated and unlawful misconduct affected both sisters over several years. Though both girls were in their mid to late teens, the court emphasized that Leifer's role made any intimate contact a grave violation of trust and authority. In late 2007, troubling reports began to emerge. School staff and family members alerted authorities, prompting an investigation. Facing allegations, Leifer fled to Israel, leaving Australia the very day after disciplinary proceedings began. For more than a decade, she remained beyond the reach of Australian jurisdiction, triggering an extradition battle that would stretch across more than 70 court hearings. She frequently claimed mental unfitness to avoid trial. But by 2020, an Israeli court ruled she was fit for extradition. After a prolonged legal battle, Leifer was finally extradited to Australia in 2021 to face trial. In April 2023, she was convicted of multiple counts of sexual abuse against students. The court heard harrowing testimony about how she had systematically groomed and abused the sisters, exploiting her position of authority within the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community where such matters were rarely discussed openly. Leifer is currently serving her sentence in a maximum security facility in Victoria. Upon release, she is expected to be deported to Israel, formally banned from working with children, and required to register with authorities. Separately, a civil court had awarded the sisters more than $1.3 million in damages, holding both Leifer and the school accountable. This case reverberated far beyond Melbourne. The prolonged extradition saga drew international attention to how some communities handle internal allegations and accountability. It raised concerns about blind spots when trusted authority figures are accused of misconduct. The sisters' determination became emblematic of the phrase, "Voices of survivors will not be silenced," inspiring both advocacy and reform. In Victoria and elsewhere, educational leaders and policymakers began re-examining reporting mechanisms, whistleblower protections, and staff training, particularly within religious or private school systems. The case highlighted the need for consistent oversight even when allegations involve high-ranking individuals. Malka Leifer's case challenges institutions and communities to place transparency and justice above reputation and loyalty. It exposes the complexities of navigating international legal systems, especially when public opinion and diplomatic channels are at play. Most importantly, it underscores the necessity of centering survivors in both legal and policy responses. As she continues her sentence behind bars, the ripple effects of her actions remain evident in the lives of the sisters who pursued justice, in the reforms now shaping school systems, and in the expectations society places on those entrusted with authority. The case is a sobering reminder that when individuals in positions of power betray the vulnerable, the response must be serious, structural, and unwavering. Monica Elizabeth Young. Monica Elizabeth Young began her teaching career with promise. At just 23 years old, she had recently completed her education degree and started working as a casual high school teacher in Sydney, Australia. Employed in early 2020, Young was placed at a school where she taught geography and science. To those around her, she seemed professional and energetic, someone beginning what should have been a long and productive career in education. But within a few weeks of starting, Young made a series of decisions that would not only end her career but also lead to criminal charges and public condemnation. It began with messages to a 14-year-old student. Using social media platforms such as Snapchat and Instagram, Young initiated contact outside of school hours. At first, the communication appeared friendly, but investigators later determined that it crossed clear professional boundaries. The conversations became personal and inappropriate, an early sign that trust was being misused. According to court records, the interactions quickly escalated. Young encouraged the student to spend time with her alone, often during school hours. She used her access as a teacher to meet the student in classrooms and other unsupervised areas. The school setting, which should have served as a safeguard, instead became a space where lines were blurred. These encounters occurred over a period of about 2 weeks and involved repeated breaches of teacher-student protocol. Concerns were raised when the student's family noticed changes in behavior and found troubling messages on his phone. The boy eventually disclosed what had happened, and his family immediately contacted school authorities. The school in turn notified police and launched an internal investigation. Detectives reviewed text conversations, social media exchanges, and CCTV footage. The evidence made it clear that Young had initiated and maintained an inappropriate relationship with the student. She was arrested in July 2020 and charged with multiple offenses related to unlawful conduct with a minor while in a position of trust. The charges were serious, but Young cooperated with the investigation, entered a guilty plea early, and expressed remorse for her actions. The court took these factors into account during sentencing but made clear that her behavior had caused significant harm. In July 2021, she was sentenced to 4 years and 9 months in prison with a non-parole period of 2 years and 5 months. This meant she would be eligible for supervised release in late 2023. The judge emphasized that while she had no prior criminal record, her actions were a severe breach of the responsibility educators have to protect and support students. As part of the sentence, Young was also permanently barred from teaching and working with children or vulnerable individuals in the future. Monica Young is currently serving her sentence at a women's correctional facility in New South Wales. Her registration as a teacher has been revoked, and she will remain under strict supervision even after release. The long-term impact on the student involved was acknowledged by the court, with emphasis placed on the importance of recovery and support services for young people affected by boundary violations. Following the case, the New South Wales Department of Education revised digital communication policies, banning unsupervised contact between staff and students outside official channels and reinforcing a zero-tolerance stance on private messaging. Schools were encouraged to report any concerns immediately, and teacher training was expanded to include identifying early signs of boundary violations and maintaining strict professional conduct, especially in digital spaces. Monica Young's case highlighted the need for equal accountability in teacher misconduct, emphasizing that consequences apply regardless of the offender's gender or age. Media coverage stressed the importance of swift and fair action to protect student welfare. Though she will be released in the future, the case serves as a lasting reminder that educators must uphold the highest ethical standards. It reinforced the need for vigilant oversight, clear policies, and a culture where students feel safe and empowered to report concerns. And that brings us to the end of this account. These cases collectively serve as powerful reminders of the profound responsibility inherent in educational roles. They highlight systemic vulnerabilities while demonstrating how legal systems and communities can respond to protect the vulnerable and uphold professional integrity. The lasting impacts on victims, families, school systems, and public trust underscore why maintaining proper boundaries and accountability remains paramount in educational environments worldwide.